And welcome back to the Cooler Jets podcast. We're Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, Jets OTAs kicked off last week. We already had an Aaron Rodgers injury scare. There's plenty of topics to break down from the first week of Jets OTAs as we head into the second week. Perhaps the biggest piece of news, not in New York, DeAndre Hopkins released from the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of Jets fans interested in pursuing that move. We'll break that down. And we're just at that point of the offseason. A lot of different miscellaneous topics from today, but I'm sure we'll hit an hour, no problem. So, Michael, with that said, how you doing, man?
Well, to be completely honest with you, and you know this, but before we started recording, I was yawning a little bit, kind of falling asleep because it's late as we're recording this. We're in a point of the off season where, as you said, a lot of miscellaneous topics, nothing specific.
That intro did take 20 takes, to be fair.
That intro took at least 20 takes, but I'm ready to go now. I've got some energy. And
did some
let's
push-ups.
hop into it. We did some push-ups. It was maybe an hour ago at this point because we were looking at the Jets coaches and kind of critiquing some of their profile pictures on the Jets website. So
well, not like, I got to say, I mean, the Jets offensive training staff, I mean, I think Hackett brings a different vibe and a better vibe than and you were saying this before than Michael Floor brought last year when you kind of watched training camp. It seems like players genuinely enjoy playing for Hackett. We'll see if that translates to on the field success, but certainly the vibes from what we've been able to see. Hopefully we can make it out to practice this summer. It's been all good, but then you definitely have the bad cops and Keith Carter and Todd Downing who maybe bring more of the accountability side.
You got some of that, positive energy with Hackett. And then I think guys like Carter and Downing kind of bring the tough love that you need. Need some of both.
I think we should start with probably the biggest piece of news and what will most likely be the title of this episode. DeAndre Hopkins, released from the Cardinals. They're going to eat a $22 million cap hit just to get him off their team. He's going to be 31 this year, but formerly known as one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver in all of football, and is still a very good player in his own right. I'll just open the door for you. I think for a lot of Jets fans, it seems like a no-brainer. Cut Corey Davis, free that $10 million, take that money and try to throw it at DeAndre Hopkins. We don't really know what he's asking for, but you'd have to imagine he kind of wants something similar to what Odell Beckham Jr. got, which, by the way, the Jets were in on OBJ. They did get priced out by the Ravens, though, so there was a line that Joe Douglas is willing to walk away from. It'll be interesting to see what Hopkins ultimately gets on the open market, but you imagine, like Joe Douglas does with pretty much any player that becomes available, he'll kick the tires on DeAndre Hopkins and explore it. I have my reasons. I tweeted it out. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I think I would pass on this for a number of reasons. But I'll go to you first. How do you feel about DeAndre Hopkins? Obviously, big name. It'd be incredibly exciting. The Jets are going all in on this season. It seems like a big upgrade. Should the Jets pursue it if they can get this done? I mean, what is your walk away number on how much you'd be willing to pay DeAndre Hopkins?
Well, I think I'm more pro Hopkins than you are, but I do understand some of the concerns that you and I were discussing before we started recording. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle against other Jets fans on this. But ultimately, I think if it's a reasonable number, I would definitely be in favor of doing it because, this is, as we know, an all-in type of season for the Jets. They want to win now. And, the second receiver spot is a concern we talked about coming into this offseason. Can they get a second guy next to Garrett Wilson who could kind of go toe-to-toe with some of those other duos that you see in the league, like they have in Cincinnati, like they have in Miami within the division, Seattle. There are a lot of these great duos in the league that could take pressure off of one another. And the Jets receiver group is deep, but they don't have that second guy with Garrett Wilson. And that's something that could be concerning if Garrett Wilson goes down at some point or if a team has a really effective game plan to double him and make other guys beat you. So they showed interest in OBJ that suggested they're interested in potentially going after, another big move at receiver. And they had a line that they didn't cross with him. But I do think they would maybe be willing to go a little bit higher for Hopkins because, he is probably safer than OBJ because, injury history isn't nearly as checkered as OBJ's past. Hopkins had the PED suspension this past year, and he's up there in age. It was an MCL sprain he had a couple years ago.
No, tear. He tore it and gets hurt.
MCL tear. So he did have that. But before that, no injuries throughout his career. And he was very productive last season, whereas Beckham, it's been a while since he's put up numbers in that elite range. And Hopkins was still doing that as recently as last year.
Although we did go through and watch.
We'll go through it.
Production.
You'll get that in your criticism section, and I agree with you in some of that. But still, like, he did have 80 yards a game last year and 7 catches, which is
all entirely
how he got it.
routes.
How he got it, we'll talk about that. But it is 80 yards a game. So anyway, I think the Jets would maybe be willing to go a little bit higher than they were for Beckham, which was probably 10 to 12 million was maybe their line on Beckham, somewhere around there.
Right.
So I think they would be. And you can cut Corey Davis to open up space. You can cut Jordan Whitehead so they can fit him, make moves to fit him in there if they need to. So if it were a reasonable price, maybe around that Beckham number, because, that would be a little bit higher than the price they had for Beckham that they were willing to pay him. The number that he got from the Ravens, if it's around that 15 million, I think I would be willing to do that. So
that was OBJ's contract. It was 15 million up to 18 million. They walked away from that. We don't know exactly what the Jets offered. You have to imagine, what do you think? Probably 12, 11 million.
Yeah, probably 12 max, 10 to 12. So
what do you think? What do you think that line for Hopkins is? 15?
Oh yeah, I think I'm saying it would, if it were around the deal he got with Baltimore, I think
you would do it.
I would do it and make those 2 moves with Whitehead and Davis to accommodate it. But there are concerns, and I do understand. It's not. This isn't the DeAndre Hopkins of 2017, 2018 that you're getting. Right. So talk about some of the concerns, and I do agree with some of these.
Look, if he signs with the Jets, I will flip into rationalization mode. It would certainly be exciting. I don't think he's a bad player by any stretch, and I think him with Rodgers is certainly exciting for a number of reasons. One, like you said, I mean, the Jets don't really have that prolific number 2 option. I would argue that I think Allen Lazard and his chemistry with Rodgers is going to be pretty effective this year. I also am higher on Corey Davis and Micheal Hardman than maybe some other people are. I like this Jets receiving room. But yeah, he will distract and he'll bring attention away from Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. And the way that DeAndre Hopkins wins, it's not through separation. He doesn't have that top end speed. He's not much of a yak guy. So there are some questions in terms of his fit in this offense. But what he does bring you is that jump ball ability. He has probably the best hands in the NFL. And so when you compare a guy who can, if you just get it in his wingspan, he can catch it, and you compare that with a quarterback who can put it pretty much anywhere, that's exciting. So I don't think it would be a bad move. I just think when you add up kind of the number of reasons and the number of negatives, and then you weigh it against the contract that he's going to get, because I don't think he's going to get 15. I think it'll be probably closer to 17 or 18 million. I could be wrong, but yes, the Jets have 18 million in cap room, and yes, they could cut Corey Davis and free up another 10. But you have to remember, a lot of that money is going to go towards Aaron Rodgers, because they're going to have to restructure his deal and put a lot of that money back into this year. And you're assuming in that case they're not cutting Corey Davis, and you got a Quinnen Williams contract extension that you're still working on. These bigger physical receivers who aren't separators, they don't typically age well. When you're a faster receiver, you have a step to lose. I mean, that's why Deshaun Jackson was playing in the league up until a few years ago and catching touchdowns. And that's why I think OBJ, despite the knee surgeries, will still be effective this season. But you look at Julio Jones, you look at Brandon Marshall, who are some of the other bigger, AJ Green. They're big-bodied receivers who they fall off a cliff around 31, around 32. They just have that. Think about with Brandon Marshall, 2015, he goes on and has one of the best receiving seasons in Jets history. 2016, I think he was still solid, even though I know he was trying to fight teammates in the locker room, but he was still a good receiver. Falls off that cliff in 2017. Granted, he was a few years older, but I think Julio Jones, his 31-year season was his last year in Atlanta, battled a lot of injuries, and the age catches up to him. And I still think Hopkins would be effective, but yeah, he's battled injuries the last few years. He did have that PED suspension, which I don't think you can just, brush off. I know he says it was a contaminated supplement, but again, that is a red flag. And then you do look at his film from last year, and yeah, you can say, okay, well, he put up all these numbers. First of all, they were force feeding him targets like crazy. And you look at the route tree that he was running. I mean, Michael, you can attest to this. It was curls and screens. And maybe that's Cliff Kingsbury. Right. I don't think, if you go back and watch him in Houston, certainly Hopkins has a little bit more of a diverse route tree. And if you put him in this offense, maybe you'd see that unlocked a little bit more. But this is going to be, I'm going to get eviscerated for this take. But based off last year, I think Corey Davis is a better route runner. I think Corey Davis is faster. I think Corey Davis is better after the catch, and I think he's a better run blocker, and I think he's a better fit in this offense. I think Hopkins is probably the better player, but that cliff is coming. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's this year where he misses a lot of time. When he's out there, he looks old and slow, and he's just not the same player. I just don't know if it's worth the risk when you have a receiver room that perfectly fits this offense that is developing that chemistry with Rodgers. I mean, look, it would be exciting. I know this is an unpopular opinion. I may look like an idiot a year from now, but I also think there's a very good chance a year from now people are going to say, oh, yeah, that wasn't the same DeAndre Hopkins from 2019. I just think it's important to look at both sides here. And I think the name is kind of clouding people's perception of who DeAndre Hopkins really is as a player. He's not a separator. He's 31. He's battled injuries. He's not a very fast player. He doesn't bring you much after the catch. He's not a great run blocker. I mean, he's an okay run blocker compared to some guys. And then I think you look at what does he bring into this offense? I don't think he's bringing anything that Allen Lazard really isn't. And he might be a better player than Allen Lazard, but Allen Lazard has that chemistry with Rodgers. He's already been paid. He is the jump ball, red zone threat, the non-separator of this offense. And I just don't think when you weigh him versus Corey Davis, you're not going to get him for just the $10 million. If it was as easy as you could cut Corey Davis for $10 million and bring in DeAndre Hopkins, I would probably do it. But I think Hopkins is going to command $6, $7, $8 million more. So then what you're saying is, okay, you're cutting Corey Davis and Jordan Whitehead. And while I do think Jordan Whitehead is overpaid and they should restructure him, and it's possible he's not in the team in 2023. Did I say 2023? Nice. It does look like Whitehead. The Jets have a plan in terms of Whitehead and Clark, and maybe Clark playing some sub linebacker packages. It does seem like Whitehead is in the fold. So you're cutting two starters to make room for Hopkins, who has a lot of red flags in his profile. I know it would be exciting. I know there are some good that maybe you can touch on a little bit more, but do you see that the red flags that I think a lot of people are blinding themselves to, that anytime there's a reason the Cardinals are willing to eat $22 million in dead cap to not have him on the team. I mean, good players. I understand he's still a good player and they want to get him off their books for 2024, but they could have waited out and seen if they could have gotten something. They chose to eat $22 million to not have him on this team. That's a red flag in addition to everything else I laid out. So if they could get him for a reasonable contract, I'd be in. It'd be exciting. But I just think when you look at the numbers that he's probably going to attract, I just think it just smells like a trap to me. It just smells like a type of guy who's going to get paid for the name, and then you're going to look back on his 2023 season and not be too happy with it. I could be wrong, but what's the point of always just falling over every single big name player that hits the market? You got to have some nuanced discussion. What do you make of some of the negatives? And also just, we went back and we were watching some of his games from last year. Granted, you could blame Cliff Kingsbury maybe for how they were using him and Kyler Murray going down and trying to keep things simple. But you look at a lot of that production and it was manufactured, and you're not getting that after the catch production that Corey Davis is bringing you. So how do you kind of weigh the pros and cons with Hopkins?
Well, yeah, I agree with a lot of the concerns you laid out, especially I think the biggest thing is because for me, when this whole Hopkins thing came up, first thing I looked at was, and I was already aware of how he played last year, but the thing I pointed to being pro Hopkins when I was talking to you was the fact that, look, he averaged 80 yards a game last year. I know he missed some games with the PEDs, but even with Kyler Murray out, still dropping 80 yards a game. On the surface, that looks really good. But then you and I were watching some of his film from last year, and they were really just force-feeding him the ball. It's kind of how he's getting that production. A lot of screens, short 5-yard curls against soft coverage, which is great if everyone in the league could get 80 yards a game off of those types of throws, and they would be doing it. So it's not to say he was bad or anything, but I don't think he was quite as good as it might seem he was based on first glance. You look at the number of yards he got. And like you said, I think watching him, he isn't quite the same player that he used to be. I think it's more apparent when you're, actually watching him versus, the fantasy stats he might have had. So I think all that's fair.
Also, the fantasy stats that he had, I mean, like, I know he had 80 yards a game, but it's like, okay, you compare it to Corey Davis, who also has injury issues. And I think that the biggest argument I think you could make for Hopkins is that Corey Davis does have a bit of the dropsy sometimes. He made some clutch catches last year, but when you're in that 4th and 15 situation and Rodgers has got to go win that playoff game, It's like it would be nice to have DeAndre Hopkins. Corey Davis made a few plays against Minnesota and Pittsburgh in those clutch situations, but I know many Jets fans can attest to some of the brutal drops that he's had the last 2 years. But you compare their stats. I mean, Corey Davis had 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Hopkins had 3 touchdowns. Yards a reception. Corey Davis averaged almost 17 yards a reception. DeAndre Hopkins averaged only 11. Corey Davis played a few more games, but you look at the targets versus the receptions. Corey Davis had 32 receptions versus DeAndre Hopkins 64. But you look at how much more DeAndre Hopkins was targeted. Hopkins was targeted 96 times and with 64 receptions. Corey Davis targeted significantly less, 64 times with 32 receptions. And I know Arizona's QB situation was in flux last year, but so was Corey Davis's with Zach Wilson. Like I do think I'm higher on Corey Davis than a lot of people are, just getting the chance to see him with Aaron Rodgers and having Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, and these tight ends take pressure away from him. I think you're going to see him really shine in this role, as opposed to last year where, he's had to deal with Zach Wilson. I don't know. I feel like Corey Davis is in store for a solid year, and I think that $10 million is going to be a discount.
And one of the big things with Hopkins, too, that's a warning sign is, as you mentioned, the targets, is the efficiency. He only averaged 7.5 yards a target last year. That was the lowest of his career. So, again, that just plays back to the fact that he was getting this ridiculous volume of targets, and that's where he got the numbers from. But in terms of, like, what is he bringing to the table, it wasn't as much as you're used to seeing from him. And you and I watched. There wasn't really anything breaking over the middle, nothing really deep. It was just a lot of, sitting down and curls and screens, easy stuff like that, which, again, not to take away from him. I'm still pro Hopkins. Like I said, if the price is reasonable, I'm on board for cut Davis, cut Whitehead, get him in here. I think the hands are the biggest thing because he probably still has.
So you would cut Davis and Whitehead, and you'd say you'd give him $15 million.
I would.
If he would do that, you would do it.
I would do that because he still gives you those hands, and like you said, Davis is. I don't think his hands are as bad as people make it out to be, but he has dropped passes in big spots, and
he does seem like the type of player in like a divisional playoff game that could be rude by Jets fans after he drops, like a
I don't think Hopkins will ever do that. Well, I mean, not saying he's never dropped a pass, but less than any other player, almost any other player in the league. So that's still the best trait that he brings, and you compare that with the QB who can put the ball anywhere on the field, which is exciting, right? But even like compared to, you mentioned Lazard, and Lazard has the catch radius, but he does drop quite a few passes as well. I don't think Hopkins would do that, so that's the most appealing trait, and I would love to have that in the building. So I'm not going to downplay his skill even at this point of his career, but I think the main reason we're bringing up all these concerns is just to put it out there that this is not a slam dunk player, despite the name and the accolades, and he still absolutely could be very good, but there is a chance that he's declining and not, a surefire upgrade, and it's worth looking at both sides of it to be ready for both possibilities of what he could potentially bring. So I would be on board for a reasonable price, but I also do see the red flags, and I wouldn't be totally upset if the Jets didn't get him, but I definitely would not like to see him go to the Bills or any division team.
Yeah, that is another argument for doing it, is if you don't, where is he going to end up? Buffalo,
right? That is
potentially
factor.
Kansas City, potentially.
I don't think Kansas City would be a good fit because, think of everything we've said so far about him. Does that sound like a Chiefs player? They're like guys who can make plays with the ball in their hands.
Not really, but if you do think of him more as he's more than this, but just in terms of he's got like stucco in his hands. He's basically a tight end in that regard, where it's just like a big-bodied physical receiver who's not going to win with separation, but in the red zone and in those contested catch situations, he's going to come down with the ball. That does bring value to your offense. Is it worth the 15, 16, 17 million he might get? Also the fact that he's still getting paid by Arizona, maybe he takes a discount. I'm sure the Jets will kick the tires on it. And, if they'll do it, I'll do what I did a few years ago when I was all aboard Team Fields. And then the Jets started to lean towards Zach Wilson and we just change course. It would be exciting. There's no doubt it would be exciting. And I'm sure that, on the field with Rodgers and this team, he would be successful. But You just think about, okay, he's had some injuries the last few years. He had the PED suspension. He's going to be 31. Where's that cliff? When the Giants signed Brandon Marshall in 2017, or when the Titans signed Julio Jones 2 years ago, people were talking about them like they were the Brandon Marshall or the Julio Jones of old, when they weren't the same player. That it's just when you don't win with separation and speed, you just don't have that step to lose when your body catches up to you. So I don't know. There's a lot of red flags for me to not want to throw a bunch of money on him, especially when it's like, you got a lot of players you got to pay here. And yeah, the Jets have some cap space, but I think it's fake cap space when you look at all the money that they've moved around and pushed back and added void years to guys. And I mean, they're going all in on this year. Now I'll ask you this, because I've been seeing a lot about Jimmy Garoppolo this week, who turns out that foot in. Remember when the press conference was delayed and I texted you and I was like, I wonder if something happened, because I was worried that maybe the deal fell through and the Jets were then going to have to go after me. Like, no, I think we're fine. And we were fine. The Raiders worked it out, but it turns out that Garoppolo's foot injury, a lot worse than was reported. We'll see the future of, how often he's able to play. It's not breaking news, though, that Garoppolo is injury prone, but it seems like maybe things in Vegas could be in flux this year. If we get to training camp and Devontae Adams requests a trade, that's a different discussion for me. That is a move where I could get the argument of, like, look, we're going all in for the Super Bowl this year. Go all in. I would be in on Devontae Adams because I think he wins with his separation. He wins with his route running. He wins with his athleticism. He's got that chemistry with Rodgers. He's been in the system. I would be willing to pay a little bit more, and I would do the cut Davis, cut Whitehead, and go after him. It's not trying to be stingy with the cap here. It's just like, if you're going to make that home run swing, you don't want to get careless. And Hopkins is a guy that I think you can. I know he's a big name. He's exciting, but with the money that he's probably going to command, I think you can pass. What do you ultimately think he gets, and what do you think about waiting and potentially maybe a guy like Devontae Adams comes available?
I mean, I would be in on that as well. There's like you said, at that point, it's definitely a no-brainer to at least check in on that and see if you can get it for a reasonable price, just because of the connection he already has with Rodgers, and the fact that his game is the type of game that you can see it aging well, because he's old as well. He's 30. He's going to be 31 this year, but he was still dominant last year, and the way he plays, he should be able to maintain that for at least a couple more years. So yeah, I would definitely make an aggressive offer if that were to happen. We'll see if it does. I mean, it's a murky situation over there. Definitely turning into something that I don't think he was signing up for or thought he was signing up for last year. So if that comes to pass, I would make an aggressive offer for sure. That he's the type of guy who, even at his age with his contract, considering the window the Jets are in, I would be willing to, make an aggressive offer to make that happen. But then at that point, you're really going all in.
There's a lot of dead cap if they try to trade him. Now that I look at the contract,
a lot of dead cap. They're potentially not going to have a first-round pick next year, and in addition to whatever you gave up to get him, it would be a lot. But at the same time, what a team that would be! I'm not even going to allow myself to think about that.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, hey, if Jimmy really can't play and they just go all in on Caleb Williams, they could put together some sort of trade package that would maybe soften that dead cap blow. But I think more likely than not, I'm happy with. How do you feel about this receiver room? I'm happy with it. I think a guy like Micheal Hardman, we were watching Flight 2023. By the way, Michael, little clip taken from this podcast in the first episode. We didn't talk about that, but
that's right.
Nice little. You're like at the 5-minute mark. You had a nice prime real estate in that video. You sounded very professional. They did muffle me. I agree with you in your sentence, and I get muffled and drowned out by the music, but it's okay. They took a clip from our podcast. That's all that matters. Pretty cool. Shout out to everybody in the Jets media department. They do such a good job. I forget where I was going to go with that, but now that I'm talking about Flight 2023, I was talking about Micheal Hardman. I mean, the speed that he's going to bring to this offense, I think, can't be overlooked. I think we're kind of just penciling him in as, okay, he's the Braxton Berrios replacement. But then when you go back and you watch Micheal Hardman and you see what he was able to do in Kansas City, and you look at this Jets receiver room, I think the Jets and Aaron Rodgers are going to have a lot of fun with Micheal Hardman. They really haven't had a player with yes, they have guys with top-end speed, but Berrios, he was fast, but he wasn't Micheal Hardman fast. And I think he's going to bring you a little bit more in terms of deep shots. Berrios, you could do the jet sweeps and the bubble screens and kick returns, but you weren't throwing, or hopefully you weren't throwing, a 50-yard bomb to Berrios downfield. You can do that with Micheal Hardman. I think he opens up a lot about this offense that we aren't really acknowledging. And again, I'm higher on Corey Davis. And I think, Lazard is, maybe I shouldn't have made the direct comparison to Hopkins because he does have the drops, but what he's bringing to this offense is what you'd be looking for Hopkins to bring. And you add in the chemistry that he has with Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. There doesn't have to be much to be said there. What do you make of this Jets receiver room? It seems pretty finalized unless the Jets make a swing on a guy like Hopkins.
I like it. I mean, the depth is great. And my favorite part about it is the well-roundedness, just the number of different skills you have, because you look at all these guys, they all bring something different. And Garrett's a do-it-all guy. But beyond that, Corey Davis, I think, gives you great intermediate route running, size over the middle, blocking. Then you have another great blocker in Lazard, but he's a great red zone threat, which Corey Davis has not really done a lot of. So, they cover up for each other in that way. A little bit more of a deep threat than Corey Davis, whereas Corey Davis, I think, is maybe more reliable route running, intermediate than Lazard would be. So they kind of cover for each other. And the fact that they are both great blockers, I think, is huge for the run game and will make a very big impact in that phase. And then Hardman, like you said, I think, role-wise, he'll probably be the Berrios replacement in terms of, he'll be the motion guy, get a lot of those design touches, but he will add that vertical element that Berrios did not bring because, there was zero verticality to Berrios' game at all. But Hardman, I don't think that'll be the bread and butter of his game. Like, I know the Jets have talked about they want to expand his role a little bit. I think they'll do maybe slightly, but for the most part, I think he'll be doing a lot of what Berrios did, but he will add some of that deep element, which Berrios, was not giving you any of that. So I think that just that alone, the threat that he gives you down the field just changes so much about how defenses will react to him, and that could open up things for the rest of the offense. And then behind that, Cobb is a really solid presence to have as a backup
I didn't even
in the
mention
slot. And we'll see what Mims could do. I know you're high on Mims, hoping Rodgers unlocks it.
I think I'm higher on him than I don't think Mims is just coming out with a Pro Bowl season.
I probably hung you out to dry there a little bit. I wouldn't say
I do that to you all the time. It's fine.
I wouldn't say you're high on Mims, but let's say you're looking out for
I'm just
Mims.
Holding on to that last glimmer of hope that he can at least be something. But no, I don't think. I think as a receiver number 5 or receiver number 6, I think he brings something to the table. I think, and this is something I wanted to ask you about Hardman. It kind of feels like if Wilson goes down, Hardman feels like the next closest thing on the roster that they might try to fit him in. I mean, I'm curious to see how many, who dominates the slot reps, because you have a guy like Hardman who you can put in on any down. You have Garrett Wilson who can win both outside and inside. And then you have two guys specifically with Allen Lazard, who, if you look at how he filled in Green Bay, he did a lot out of the slot, out of that big slot role. And so I think you're going to see Lazard take some slot reps, and then you have Randall Cobb on top of that. I think Hardman is probably Wilson's direct backup. If Wilson were to go down, I think you're going to see Hardman get some of those reps, and you'll see him outside a little bit more. And then, in terms of Mims, I just think he's the only other guy on the roster that can kind of replace maybe what Allen Lazard is bringing you. I mean, again, what we're talking about this entire podcast in terms of that jump ball type of receiver who hasn't really had a chance to shine. I guess my thing on Mims is, all right, he was in the doghouse on the floor, clearly wasn't a great fit. I do think he made some strides last year. He still obviously struggled with some penalties and some mental miscues. He's not the sharpest route runner. He had some drops. I mean, he's a disappointing second-round pick, but new offense, fresh start. If Lazard were to go down and you have a Hall of Fame quarterback who's notorious for getting, him, Peyton, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, all these top-flight quarterbacks over the last, decade or so, can make something out of nothing. And I think Mims has the athletic profile to, do something. I also think he's a guy that might be traded before the season starts. But what are you going to get from Mims at this point? So in terms of direct backups, though, do you think it's Hardman comes in for Wilson if Wilson goes down? If Lazard goes down, I mean, I would imagine Corey Davis probably takes. And again, you're not just trying to completely replicate the exact body type. I mean, I think, like you said, the cool thing about this receiver room is the variability and different skill sets. And if the Jets do, if Lazard goes down, I think you might see the Jets mold their offense a little bit more to focus on the skill sets of a guy like Micheal Hardman instead of trying to pigeonhole Mims directly into his role. But I do think it's nice to have depth options that kind of can mirror what your starters are bringing. I completely forgot about Cobb though. He goes under the radar. How much do you think is he going to be like our Udonis Haslam, who's just kind of on the bench and you're not even sure if he's in uniform, or do you think Cobb does play like a considerable
I
amount?
don't think so. I think he'll play. I think when everyone's healthy, he'll probably get maybe some. I mean, teams usually will go 5 deep at receiver, but the 5th guy will only play maybe 5 to 10 snaps, something like that. So I don't think he'll play a lot when everyone's healthy. But when someone gets hurt, he might get a big boost because he's probably the most pure route runner out of the slot that they have. But like you said, Lazard he played more slot than on the outside at certain points in his Green Bay career. He was really split between those two roles. Hardman obviously is mostly a slot guy. Davis can do it as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can manage it when someone goes down. I think you could even trust Conklin to flex out a little bit if you need him to. Obviously not saying on a large scale, but for occasional reps, I think he's the route running to do that. So there's a lot of different ways you can manage it. But I do think part of the appeal of getting at Hopkins is that, if Garrett Wilson does go down, it's just nice to have another guy who, can step into those shoes and handle the responsibility of being that guy who's going to attract all the attention. So that would be part of the reason I'm still intrigued by the idea of adding him. But even if they can't get that type of player, I think they have a committee that could, come together and be able to replace other players through their interchangeability.
You've done this for the defensive line in years past, kind of projecting, and I'm putting you on the spot here. So, you might not have the most analytical answer here, but kind of projecting the snap counts in terms of, how the Jets might rotate their defensive lines. When you look at this offense and including the running backs and tight ends, how do you kind of see, roughly, I'm sure you'll do a Jets X Factor article where you'll really get into, exact percentages and personnel packages, but roughly, how do you kind of see the snap share between the 5 receivers that we talked about, 6 if we throw in Mims, the tight ends with Conklin and Uzama, who seems like he's best buddies with Rodgers, who, maybe that leads to Uzama getting on the field a little bit more. I don't know if Conklin's at these practices. I could be wrong, but we were looking through the photos. I didn't see any photos of Conklin. Could be wrong. Ruckert seems to be, I'm judging entirely off of one photo from OTA, but he had a nice touchdown. It seems like everybody's pretty hyped for him. I mean, he is a 3rd-round pick, so you'd imagine maybe he gets some more reps. And then with the running backs, the Jets have, under LaFleur, preferred a heavy running back by committee approach. The Packers, did do running back by committee, but Aaron Jones was their starting running back. They mix in A.J. Dillon. But Breece is coming off that ACL. But when Breece is healthy, how do you see them kind of mixing just all of their weapons between running backs, tight ends, receivers, each position group? Where do you see the share of snaps going?
Yeah, I'm definitely planning to do this type of article at some point. It's one of the things I had listed as an idea, exact snap count projections for
How
all
long
these
is that
offensive
list right
positions.
now? At the end of May, where you really just have to come up with content.
It's not very long. I kind of have it's like a flowing thing. There's usually like 2 at a time. I'll knock it out the next couple days and come up with one each day. So it's this part of the year is the toughest part of the year for content because you got to dig deep and really just come up with niche topics. Recently, I did something on the skill position blocking, which is it shouldn't be considered a niche topic because it's very important, but people don't seem to be as intrigued with that as they are with Aaron Rodgers going to a Taylor Swift concert. But alas, but yeah, I think in terms of the snaps with the receivers, Garrett Wilson will be at the top. Obviously, probably play like 90% plus, somewhere around there. Who the second guy will be, or even if there is a second, or if they split it, is interesting. Probably Lazard. I think you're right. He'll because of I think his slot experience over Davis. Davis can do it, but Lazard is more experienced. I think that'll lend him the upper hand, and the fact because the fact that he can play in the slot and he's a good blocker, who you could flex him and he's close to the line of scrimmage in a tight split. You could put him outside. He has the size to be there. You could really put him anywhere. I think that's going to give him that. And some of that applies to Davis as well. But like I said, it's the slot experience that Lazard has over him. So I agree. I think he'll be second, maybe 75, something like that. Davis, probably close, 65, 60. Then I think you have Hardman. He'll probably be under 50, but like 40, something like that. So I think that would be receiver. And like I said, Cobb maybe plays a handful a game. Running back is the interesting one. And it all depends on how Breece Hall is recovering. Do you think he'll play in the first game? I think he will, right?
Oh, yeah, he's already
okay.
running. I think the big difference, too, is this is a contact ACL injury, and I think a lot of times mentally it can be harder to come back from the non-contact ACL injuries because it was just, getting that confidence in your knee again to cut. I think it seems like Breece Hall. I mean, if you buy into the PR that Robert Saleh has been feeding the media about we got to slow him down and whatnot because he's just so eager to get back in the field. I think Breece Hall is ready by training camp.
Yeah, so it seems like he'll be ready to play, but there's always, you expect some sort of ramp up period once they get back. So to start, maybe it's a little more balanced at the top, as Hall kind of gets his legs under him. Maybe him and Knight
Number
split
2.
the carries to lead. I'm leaning towards Knight. I think he's the guy and the main reason is the passing game. I think that's the difference he has over Carter because Carter's really struggled with blocking. He's actually been credited with the most sacks allowed by running backs over the last 2 years with 6. And Knight did not have a lot of pass blocking reps last year, but he was very sharp in the little that I saw, which is, it's a grain of salt because he didn't really play too much, but he did look sharp, and Carter has now struggled for 2 years in a row. He's also had some drops. I know year one he did have, he was good as a receiver. He had quite a few catches. He was breaking tackles.
We can't just stereotype him as a third down pass catching running back because he's smaller.
Right. Like just because Darren Sproles was good, all short running backs are third down backs now. But no, I think the passing game is what puts Knight ahead because passing game value is so important for running backs now because passing is becoming more prevalent. And, there's more positionless offense. Just look at what the Falcons are doing and the way they've invested in running back. Teams want their running backs to be able to flex out, be able to block, and do all these different things. So I think that's how you get more snaps, being able to play in any situation and handle different roles. And I think Knight is more reliable than Carter in the passing game. So that is going to buy him more snaps, I think. So I guess to start out, let's say maybe Hall and Knight are splitting the lead. Maybe they're getting like 40% each, and then Carter 20%. And then what do you think?
I think Abanikanda is going to get kind of more than we're expecting.
You think so?
I think with running back, I mean, first of all,
I think he's going to get his touches. I think it'll just be more like change of pace, like every now and then, maybe a 5 carries a game type of thing.
I think he gets more than 5. I mean, especially as the season goes on. I mean, week 1, I think he'll be a little bit lower, but I think he's a guy who's going to flash early on and he's going to bring some juice. And, running back is one of those positions. It doesn't really matter if you're a day 3 pick. I think he brings something that the other running backs don't. And especially, the fear with Breece coming back from that ACL is, how's that explosion going to be? Is he still going to have the same juice? Carter has never really brought that top end speed. I think Zonovan Knight, he does hit the hole pretty hard. And, you saw it a little bit last year that he was able to come in and instill some energy. But I think, especially as the season goes on, I think you're going to see a lot more Abanikanda just because, he's like a lightning rod every time he gets the ball. So yeah, I could see his share being a little bit higher. I want you to get to the tight ends, but I have a question kind of relating to the tight ends and receivers. I feel like we're going to get less 12 personnel than we had last year. Obviously, I mean, you could compare LaFleur/Hackett's offense to the Shanahan system that the Jets were running last year. Certainly, they have the tight ends, and we will get looks with Uzomah and Conklin on the field and with the emergence of Ruckert. But as you've said to me maybe 1,000 times in the DMs, CJ Uzomah is a sneaky, terrible run blocker. I think you can make the case that for the Jets to run, having both Corey Davis and Allen Lazard out there on the field, being able to motion them and get, it's going to force lighter boxes for Breece Hall or whoever's the running back. And I think running out of 11 personnel might be the way to go for the Jets. I mean, they'll certainly still mix in 12 personnel, but what do you think about that? And then what do you kind of think about the tight end shares?
That is a really interesting topic because
write that down.
He has a history of using it a lot. Last year, the Broncos led the league in 12 personnel usage, 31% of their plays. And in 2021, when Hackett was the offensive coordinator with the Packers, they were second at 30%. So they have a history, or Hackett has a history of using 12 personnel a lot. And that's even more than the Jets last year. They were ninth at 22%. So
it just made me look dumb.
No, I'm not making you look dumb because I actually think there's credence to what you said, because with Davis and Lazard, two guys who almost function as tight ends because of how good they are as blockers, the size they have, maybe they switch it up and they don't play as much 12 personnel because they trust the receivers blocking. And, I think there's credence to what you're saying, right? Because, despite the history, it doesn't mean they're just going to keep doing the same thing. You can adapt to the talent that you have, and you should adapt to the talent that you have, is really what I meant to say, because not everyone does do that, but it's the right thing to do. So based on the talent they have, and also last year, for much of the year, the Jets were better running the ball out of 11 personnel than with 12 personnel. And a big part of that was because of what you said I consistently tell you, which is CJ Uzomah was struggling as a blocker last year. So that was a big part of it. But maybe if they like Ruckert, he steps up, takes that role, he blocks well, maybe they do continue to run 12 personnel. I don't know. This will be interesting to watch.
What about the Titans' usage of 12 personnel versus 11 personnel? And I'll give you some time to look that up. Because I think, the argument for running a lot of 12 personnel, and again, there's obviously going to run sets with the two tight ends out there. I mean, you're going to see it. I just think you're going to see a little bit less so because I think coming out in 12 personnel, the thinking is that I think it disguises the pass a little bit. Yes, you have, the two tight ends in there for run blocking, but also, you force the defense to kind of load the box to stop the run. And that opens up the pass. But I think for the Jets, they have a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers who defenses are going to have to defend against, and they want to open up the run. So coming out in 11 personnel, you force those lighter boxes, and then you're able to give the ball to Breece Hall, and the Jets are able to kind of establish themselves on the ground that way. I do feel like when you look at last year, especially, you look at the run blocking the Jets were getting out of Corey Davis, and you look at the run blocking that they can get out of Allen Lazard, especially with one of them playing in the slot and using motion. It's a pseudo 12 personnel in it of itself, because you can kind of motion them in, Lazard or Davis, as an H-back. And I don't know. I think you're going to see a lot more running out of 11 personnel, and I think that is a good way for them to get their best 11 on the field. It all depends on the development of Ruckert and how Conklin and Uzomah look, though, because if Uzomah has great chemistry with Rodgers and Ruckert's really developing and Conklin is having his best season as a pro, then you're going to get a very healthy dosage of 12 personnel. I just think that on paper, you look at it, and I was like, I think 11 personnel is going to open up this run game a lot. But what about the Titans? Did you see anything on that? I feel like they ran out.
Pull it up. They were 8th highest last year, 24%.
Well, what about in their 11 personnel usage?
Pulling that up right now.
Just because we have Downing and Carter. I mean, I know Hackett's controlling. I mean, really, this is Aaron Rodgers' offense.
They were 25th and 11 with 53%. And the interesting thing about the Jets is, despite running 12 personnel a lot last year, they were actually pretty high in 11 as well. They were 10th in 11 personnel at 68%, and that's because they really only used those two packages. Like they barely used anything else besides those two. So they were actually pretty high ranking in both, like 21 personnel, very low, 22, 10.
We might want to explain what
these are some of the other ones. Well, I mean, basically the personnel is, the first number is the number of running backs. The second is the number of tight ends. So 11 is one running back, one tight end. 12 was one running back, 2 tight ends, and so forth for the rest of them. So basically the Jets stayed in 11 or 12 for the majority of the time, more so than pretty much any other
Think they
team.
keep a
So
fullback?
I don't think you don't think there's
They
enough
have
space
Bowden.
in the roster, right? I mean, like if you want Kuntz to make the team, that's a fourth
That's
tight
true.
end you got to keep. That pick probably eliminated the
You could use
possibility
Ruckert as a
or
pseudo
decreased the
fullback.
possibility because I don't know if Kuntz is even a lock to make the
Yeah,
roster
you
in
could
week
use.
one.
Yeah, he
So.
was. You could use Ruckert as a pseudo fullback in some packages because I think he would shine in that role just based off not just his run blocking in college, but that Week 18 game against Miami. I mean, you posted those clips. I mean, he was really a heat-seeking missile out there, and I don't know if there's. I mean, I know there is a difference from playing tight end to fullback, but in terms of run packages, it's just lining him up in the backfield and telling him to go take a
I
linebacker's head
think being
off.
like
I
an
think he can do it.
H-back type of guy could
Yeah,
work for him because, like, straight up fullback, I think you usually want a more compact guy for that.
he's
Like a little bit
compact.
shorter. But at 6'5", like I'm saying, like, don't you think it's a little tall for a fullback? Like, you want a guy who's low to the ground who can get under a linebacker,
He
clear
was
out the
taking
holes.
people's heads off last year. I mean,
I know he
does
was, but his just feels a little
moving
different.
up into the left
Fullback. I
change
don't
that
know.
too much? I get what you're saying. You
Just
want a bowling ball to build up
because
some.
I
You
think if
want
you're in that
Sheldon Richardson
H-back
back
role,
there.
it's more like sealing out the edge type of responsibilities. Fullback is someone who's going straight up the middle. I don't know. I could see it, but we'll see what happens.
How did you feel about the tight end usage? Did you say that, or did I take you off the path there in terms of the snap
Oh, the
counts
snaps?
between?
No, I don't
Yes,
think we got to that yet. I still
I
think
went off road.
Conklin's gonna way off the road. It's something we do a lot, especially on May 28th. But I still think Conklin's gonna lead the way by a pretty wide margin. He's the most well-rounded player in the group between blocking and receiving. And then I think Ruckert's gonna take that leap and get ahead of Uzama. I do feel like it's gonna happen because I know they gave Uzama a nice deal. I know he's a great guy. He's friends with Rodgers and all that.
He likes
But
Broadway shows.
likes Broadway shows. He's got all these great attributes that you just absolutely love, and your $8 million tight end. But I don't know. The film last year, in terms of the blocking, just wasn't there. We know receiving, he's never going to be a big time pass catcher
Got the
in terms
yak.
of volume. He does have the yak, which I think they'll try to maximize this year. But I don't know.
Rodgers was getting a lot out of Robert Tunyon. I am curious to see what he can get out of Uzama and
That is,
Conklin.
he's gotten tight end production out of, not the greatest tight ends. I mean, Jermichael Finley, old Jimmy Graham, like you said, Robert Tunyon. So he's got a history of doing that. But I think Conklin might be as good or better than any of those guys. So I think Conklin could be the greatest beneficiary of that. But I mean, they spent a third-round pick on Ruckert last year, so they do like him, and that was despite signing Conklin and Uzama. So I think
Best player
he's going to
available.
get that chance. They thought he's the best player available last year, and if they're honest with themselves about what they saw from Uzama's run blocking last year, they should be eager to see what Ruckert can do, see if he can improve on that. And I think he's going to prove to them that he is capable of it. So that might be a bold prediction just because it seems pretty safe to say that Uzama's just going to, play that same role as last year. But I'm going to bet on Jeremy Ruckert. Him and Tony Adams are two young guys who I feel good about stepping up and winning a bigger role.
All right. Well, if you remember, the reason I think I went down this path because that was not in our Google Doc. We went completely off road. But I was talking about Flight 2023, I think, and then because there was a clip about Salah talking about Micheal Hardman, and then that got me on the Micheal Hardman film watching, and then we started talking about receivers and whatever. But bringing it back to Flight,
at this point of the year, you could just go wherever you want with it.
Bringing it back to Flight 2023, I think the interesting storyline that came out of this past week was it was the draft episode, and it did do a lot to dissuade the media perception that Joe Douglas and the Jets, got surprised by the Patriots trading out with the Steelers and getting jumped for Broderick Jones. I mean, there are a lot of media personalities. I won't name them, but I was going to name them, but I won't. Kind coming out and saying that Joe Douglas, basically got played like a fool, and that the Jets really wanted Broderick Jones. Everybody in the NFL knew it. The trade down cost him, and wow, an idiot. And then you see the Flight 2023 clip, and he not only calls it, but there's also the clip. Now, I want to get your take on this, because I think a lot of people are taking the clip as this was the Jets draft board. But Joe Douglas asks John Carr, who's the director of college scouting, how do you have the three of them? Or how do you have it? Or I forget his exact words, but he goes, Will McDonald, Michael Mayer, and Broderick Jones. And a lot of people are taking that as their draft board, which is possible. I also think, if we're just going to be fair and balanced here, I think it's also possible that was just John Carr's top three, because why would Douglas ask for what the draft? You'd imagine that they have just, their draft board is right in front of them. They kind of know what their board looks like. It seemed like he was asking John Carr how he had them ranked. What did you make of that? And then what did you kind of make of Douglas predicting the future? Regardless, the Jets come out of it. Two things are very clear. Joe Douglas is a champ, and he definitely rules on draft day. He's a very level head, and I don't think the Jets were surprised by anything. I think the reason the clock got run down is I think the Jets were probably just trying to trade down. I think the Jets wanted to trade down a few picks and then take Meyer or Will McDonald or one of these guys that was available. I think they had them probably all pretty similarly ranked as middle of the pack first-round talents. But the other thing you can take away is the Jets did like Will McDonald quite a bit. I mean, it sounds like a lot of it's, again, the power of editing. You don't know which clips are taken out of context, but at least a few guys in that room had Will McDonald as their top edge rusher. And you can see why. He has all the traits of a solid edge rusher. So I think, while, NFL draft analysts will have clowned the Jets for taking Will McDonald, it very much reminds me of when the Seahawks took Bruce Irvin in 2011. And a lot of people were like, who? They took Bruce Irvin? I think it was at 15, because the Jets took Quentin Cole to pick after it, and also reportedly wanted to take Bruce Irvin. Everybody lost their minds. Then it turns out Bruce Irvin has a nice long NFL career. And you could see something like that with Will McDonald. You also saw the clip of Saleh shaking Will McDonald and basically telling him that there are a lot of teams that were pissed at the Jets for taking Will McDonald because they thought they were going to get Will McDonald. So, they come out of it looking good and feeling good about taking Will McDonald. But I do think, Jets Twitter's kind of running with that top three is like that was their set draft order. I think you could take away that it wasn't like Broderick Jones was this guy that they felt like they had to have, and they were devastated that they didn't get him. So what did you kind of make of that whole draft scene from what we got to see?
Well, yeah, I think there was some, misquoting and misunderstanding about what was actually said, because there was no definitive statement of that being the order on their board. It was just exactly what you said. Douglas asking John Carr his specific rankings, which may or may not have been different than the team consensus or other scouts. But at the very least, it does show that there was at least one prominent scout in the room who, had
he's the
Meyer
director
in
of
that
college
discussion.
scouting.
Right. So basically, it probably is a good representation of the team board. Most likely, it's not definitive based on what we saw, but it's probably a good representation. So just the fact that Meyer's name was brought up is interesting, because, of course, he didn't end up going until the early in the second round, and he was the third tight end selected, which was a surprise because he was mostly considered the number one tight end going into the draft. But yeah, it was surprising to hear that a tight end was in the mix. But at the same time, I think some of the clips they showed.
Maybe I'll take back my take on the Jets using less 12 personnel.
Yeah, I mean that plays into it as well. I didn't even think of that. The fact that the Meyer thing really just only further adds to the
best
idea
player
that
available.
Maybe they'll play more 12. And in terms of, like, we were talking about Hopkins earlier, part of the appeal being the Jets don't have that big time second receiver. Maybe 12 personnel's part of that as well. Like, they don't feel like they need another huge. I mean, they did pursue Beckham, but still 1-year deal, not a huge commitment. So maybe they feel like they're going to be playing a lot of 12 personnel, and that's why they're okay with a deep wide receiver group, and that's not necessarily top heavy. Just spitballing with that, but
that's all this pod is right now.
That's basically that is. That's what it's been for a few weeks now. Got a couple more weeks of this until
Hey, next week we have a an episode planned. So we have a lineup, but continue. Sorry, I cut you off. Well, it's actually, I do have a question for you to keep going with, but you and I went back and forth on this and you were ultimately right. But Douglas also predicts, I think this is how you took it. And this is how I came around to what you were saying, predicts Meyer to the Lions, McDonald to the Packers, and then he predicted the trade up. If you believe the reports, the Jets would have taken Jahmyr Gibbs. If those three guys were off.
I mean, it would have been interesting to hear his name get thrown into some of these clips. But
these are the same analysts that did say that the Jets, got spurned for Broderick Jones. So you don't know how much of it you can buy in, but there were
I don't buy that. Rumors. I'm going to choose not to buy that rumor. I don't. There's no way, right?
I know. I could see.
They were not taking running back.
They very firmly
the
are
second best running back in the
class.
They
very firmly are taking best player available, and I think they were probably really high on Gibbs, and I think a year from now or 2 years from now, if Gibbs is, a top 5 running back in the league, I think he'll be like, okay, yeah, I could see. I think we weigh the positions too much. I agree though that would have. That
only because it's a running back, like the tight end thing, that'd be shocking. But
yeah,
okay,
but they would.
But running back in the first round is always questionable.
Yeah, but they could get creative with Brees and Gibbs. I mean, if they're both scoring a ton of touchdowns together, I mean, I don't think we'd be that upset.
Running back though in the first round, like remember, you take a running back in the first round, he's immediately one of the top paid running backs in the league. It's a very risky thing to do.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, but Brees coming off the ACL, they want to be a ground and pound team. If they had Jahmyr Gibbs as a top 5 player in the class, though, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this all ages. It'll be very interesting to see also about Michael Meyer as well. I'm hoping that he becomes a good player, because if he's just, if he's a bust, then that's not a great look.
I got to give credit to Robbie Sabo though, because I remember he was bringing that up a few months before the draft, and people were saying it was a crazy idea, but sure enough, he was very close to actually being the pick. So Robbie's on point with that one.
We really are going to change how we analyze the draft next year.
We never listened to it. We tried to do it this year.
Just don't listen to the consensus. Watch it for yourself.
Don't worry about the consensus. No shopping list. Everything's on the table. And we didn't talk about some of these guys. We still fixated on offensive tackle.
We're not doing it. I know. Early in the offseason, I remember thinking, I think when it became clear that they were going to keep Carl Lawson, that was kind of when I stopped looking at edge prospects. But, I remember thinking, okay, it could make sense for the Jets to go out and pay another edge. Speaking of defensive line, and I think we can wrap up here the last topic of the day.
Before we get to that quickly, I just want to say one more thing about the draft segment. I guess the biggest thing is it's at least good to see proven footage that they did have McDonald as their preferred guy in that spot, and to see footage of them, actually celebrating the pick and stuff. Because
that considering they took.
I mean, yes, obviously, but I think there was, when they made the pick, I feel like there's some skepticism around, did they actually really want him? Like I remember the press conference after that, like some people thought that they didn't look too thrilled.
Some
Douglas
people
and Sala. Me, but I did see some other people say that as well. So it was cool to just that's the most fascinating thing about watching this footage is that it's because they can come out after the pick and say whatever they want, like we won this guy all along, we were just praying he would fall to us. So they'll say all that stuff with every pick, but to see actual proven footage of like they actually wanted that guy is cool to see. And again, like you said, they picked him, so yes, they wanted him. But to see proof of that beforehand, especially when they show like the not on draft day, but weeks before that when they're going through their review, and they say like, we love this guy. We have him as our top ranked player compared to some of these other prospects. That's fascinating to see. I would like to be like one of the editors on the social team, because you got to think they see all of the footage.
So much hits the cutting room floor.
Everything that happens.
Even that montage. Even that montage where they didn't name the players, but they were showing different little sound bites of scouts saying like, the only thing that's going to stop this guy from being a Hall of Famer.
There was one guy like
I was probably Jalen Carter. That I would imagine
they're just destroying his off field. Like he just doesn't like the process at all.
I know. I'd love to know who they were talking about in some of
And
the
like,
one where
if
they
you're one of
say,
those editors, you know exactly who they're talking about. You get to see
yeah,
all this footage. That's fascinating.
the one where they say the only thing that's going to stop him from being a Hall of Famer is himself. That has to be Carter, because who else are you putting the Hall of Fame tag on outside of like a
Right.
top 5 pick? So I don't know. Yeah, but interesting. I love watching it. The other thing I think you could take out of it is it seems like Tippmann was their top guy that they were really hoping would fall in the second round, which was pretty clear. But it makes sense that once they did the Rodgers deal, or once they were in the talks for Rodgers, and it became clear they're going to have to give up that second round pick, I think they really did want to just get back into that area of the draft, because it is pretty consistently the best or the highest hit rate of the draft. Early top half of the second round is just a great place to have a pick. Feels like there's always great players there, always great value. And especially in this class, you knew the interior offensive line was high. It seemed like Douglas really liked Cody Mauk. I mean, he literally asked right as they were about to take Tippmann again, like, what do you guys think about Mauk? Like, he really did want to take the toothless ginger from North Dakota State. But also, how about the part with Keith Carter where he was like, I know Joe Tippmann, or he was talking about Joe Tippmann. He's like, I know he has a mullet, but he's cool. I was like, it's a bit of an oxymoron. I mean, of course, if he has a mullet, of course he's cool. I don't know.
Oh, I forget. Is that exactly what he said? Because I
I
remember it being
paraphrase.
like, he was saying something like,
He's got a
yes,
cool
he
way
has
about
a
him.
mullet, but like even outside of that, he's a cool guy. It's not just because of the mullet.
Okay, well, maybe I read it wrong. All right, fine. Anything else for that? I know there was other stuff that I wanted to talk about, but the whole draft episode was interesting. I liked it more than episode 1. I got to be honest. Episode 1, it was still good. It was exciting to see all the Rodgers stuff, but I love the draft episode because it just gives you a little
This
bit
is
of an
more
insight.
interesting because the first episode is cool, but it's like didn't really give insight into anything, and it had a lot of quotes from
from the
meaningless
Cool Your Jets
people in the media,
podcast.
like Cool Your Jets podcast. Like, I mean, who wants to hear that? But the draft episode, that's more important.
All right, last topic. We were talking about defensive linemen. I put out this tweet. You turned it into an article. Thank you for doing the work on that one. But Micheal Clemons, we were looking through the photos. He looks a hell of a lot bigger. He's definitely has added at least 10 pounds, maybe more. I'd be curious once they get him on the podium to ask him exactly how much he's added. But generally, that's in conjunction with the coaching staff. They meet at the player exit interviews and kind of talk about their plans for the upcoming year. And you saw him used as a 3-tech a lot more in the preseason of 2022, and he shined there and outside. But like very clearly in the JFM mold of, okay, you can play him outside on the edge in run situations, and then you could kick him in on third down. He got a few reps there, especially towards the end of the season. I think they met, and I think their vision for him is to be JFM's replacement, who they can trade or cut next year for no cap hit. Hopefully they're not cutting him, but hopefully he plays well and they can maybe flip him for a second or third round pick. He's a great player. Maybe he sticks around, but you just look at all these guys they got to pay, and they have a guy like Clemons. I mean, I'm just thinking ahead here, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he sticks around, but when you could get that $12 million off your books and you have a guy like Clemons behind him in this deep defensive line, and you look at the 49ers trading DeForest Buckner a few years ago, I don't think JFM would get a first-round pick, but he's a damn good player. We'll see what happens. Get ahead of ourselves here. But it seems like Clemons is his direct backup in terms of a guy who can be outside and then flood inside. But I think you might even see him get even more reps inside than JFM. You broke a lot of those reasons down in the article this week. But what did you make of it? I mean, he looks massive, and I think it really does fit his skill set to kind of be that Justin Tuck type player for this defensive line. I'm really excited to see what Micheal Clemons does this year. And it allows him to get on the field a little bit more with this extremely crowded edge room.
Well, I think there's a chance he could, sort of play that JFM role as the backup, like you said, compared to last year where he played a few snaps on the interior, 21 all season, so basically like one a game. So he did a little bit.
When he lampooned Lawrence, wasn't he from 3-tech?
He was. On that play, he was.
Yes.
So he did a little bit, but not a lot. So maybe he could switch to that JFM role and kind of do JFM's not 50-50, but maybe Clemons could do 50-50. But I think that there's something to be said for kind of pushing him in there, maybe if not full-time, just leaning towards there more than the edge, because, I mean, you just think about the logjam at that edge position, And there are so many mouths to feed there. And, I think taking one guy completely out and putting him on the interior and Clemons, I think, can really help free up some snaps and make sure everyone's getting the playing time that they deserve over there. And I don't think it's a disservice to Clemons. I think it's a role that he could play just as well in, if not even better, because, we all know how much of, I don't even know how to describe him. You could just pick all of the intimidating adjectives you can think of.
I kind of want to get a Clemons jersey.
He's a raging bull. He's just a mountain.
Is that just because of the septum piercing?
That can contribute to it. But, it's his broad frame. It's, just destroying.
He has a sense of humor, though.
As you said.
He has a sense of humor, though. If you watch him, like, he's aware of his character. But, like, every other, you'll see him, like, be self-aware about what he's doing.
He knows what
he's tough,
doing.
But he's being
Carl
funny.
Lawson said it last year in a press conference that he's a hilarious guy. But that's a huge part of playing defensive tackle. I think you have to have a great sense of humor. No, I'm kidding. But,
we want our tight ends liking Broadway plays and our defensive tackles having a good sense of humor.
Right. I think tight ends need to have unique interests that you might not expect from football players, and defensive tackles got to have a good sense of humor. Like Quinn Williams, bless you, thank you, great stuff. Back to the serious football stuff. I think Clemons, pound for pound, he's got to be one of the strongest guys in the team. If he's not, forget the disclaimer, just flat out the strongest guy in the team. So even though he's 270, back in his case as well, I think.
God, I can't wait. I can't wait to see that training camp matchup.
That'll be good for sure. Anyone else you would throw in there? Maybe pound for pound. Yeah.
Well, pound for pound means
right. So you could put a DB up against.
Yeah, if we're just going like strength for their body weight.
Yeah.
Quincy Williams probably.
Yeah, he's up there.
That guy hits harder than anybody on the team, I'd say.
And maybe Brees.
Yeah, maybe Brees. But just flat out strongest guy on the team, it's either Becton, actually one of those defensive tackles. Maybe Al Woods. That guy.
Although pound for pound, he does.
I know. I'm just saying,
right, yeah.
I'm just saying baseline strength. Yeah, pound for pound.
Just the fact that that's the point. Like that Clemons is in that conversation.
The underrated
270.
One? All right. Underrated one? Whitehead.
That's a good one.
If we're going pound for pound, I think Whitehead might be. He's not a big guy, but yet he hits as hard as pretty much anybody on the team, maybe minus Quincy Williams.
It's a good choice for sure. But yeah, just the point that Clemons is, despite being 270, which is like big edge rusher, not quite defensive tackle weight, he's still just the way he hits, the way he takes on blocks he looks like he could be playing defensive tackle, and he's not that far off from being able to do it. I think if he has put on weight, like it appears based on the pictures, he may have
put on weight. He's put on weight. Come on now.
I think it's a fair assumption to say yes. We'll see if he confirms it.
He's
but I think
definitely put on weight. Come on. I know you don't want to because we don't have him on a scale, but even if it's just 5 pounds, he's put on weight, but it's definitely not. It's definitely more.
Right. So let's say he put on 5 or even 10.
Look at that photo of him next to Solomon Thomas.
Right. Solomon Thomas is 280, and he's one of the smaller defensive tackles in the league. So if Clemons can get up to
people
around
can't see
that,
this, but I'm going to share my screen with you just while you're talking, just so you can see what I'm talking about. He's definitely put on weight.
So if Clemons can get up to around that 280, then he's in range to be one of the smaller defensive tackles in the league. So he's not far off from the weight class of a defensive tackle. And, with his strength and his great length too, his arms are almost 35 inches above 90th percentile for either edge or defensive tackle. So he's got the length, he's got the strength. He has great skills as a run stuffer. He reads plays well. He knows how to shed blocks, to stack up his blocker. Great tackler. He had no missed tackles last year, so he has all the skills for run stuffing.
My God, he damn near killed Tyrod Taylor in the preseason and Trevor Lawrence.
I know. He hits hard and he doesn't miss either. Like I said, he's
all right. Pound for pound, it's Clemons.
Yeah, you just take a look at him. It's pretty obvious. We'll go with him. Sorry, Becton. Number 2 is not bad at all, though, considering some of the guys this team has. But yeah, you look at the way he hits, how hard some of these hits he puts on guys are. You'd think that he's a reckless player who's, have some misses to go with that, but he doesn't. Like, he's so flexible for his size that he is able to, you know, be an accurate tackler as much as he is a hard hitting one. So you put all these things together, and I think he can handle being a defensive tackle despite being on the lighter end for that position. And I think pass rushing wise, on the edge, he's not going to be the fastest guy or the bendiest guy. And that shows up in his, average time off the line of scrimmage. He's below average for an edge rusher. But for a defensive tackle, when he lined up on the interior, his average get off the line of scrimmage was faster than average. And if you look at his relative athletic score, he's pretty good as an edge rusher, but if you compare him against defensive tackles, he goes up to elite. So you put him inside. I think he has the strength, the run stuffing skills to handle that, despite being a smaller player for the position. And I think his pass rushing could take a step up because he does have the technique. You could see that last year. He had some great moves as a pass rusher, got a few sacks, a few big hits, and they're the product of, he has a swipe in his toolbox. He can get a rip in there. He has some moves. It's just that, on the edge, like you said, he's one of the bigger edge rushers. He doesn't have the greatest bend or, top end speed off the edge, but you put him at defensive tackle. Now he's an athletic problem compared to most guys at that position. So I think he can handle it. And I think there's something to be said for just putting him inside full time and, giving him enough reps to, free up some snaps for those guys on the edge.
Yeah. And I think, while he might still be slightly undersized as the defensive tackle, the thing that really makes that not the case in my eyes is the length. I mean, you look at his arms and the power that he'll be able to generate. Obviously, he's out of that weight. He's not a small guy. He has the power, but it's not like, if he was that weight and height with short little T-Rex arms, it would be different trying to move inside. With that length, I think the thing that's really exciting is not just the pass rushing chops and the speed and athleticism he's going to be able to bring from rushing from the 3-tech, but also it's the stunts. Having him as a guy inside working outside is going to free up a guy like Carl Lawson to come flying in the middle. Really excited to see Clemons in the field, and this whole defensive line as a whole. It's just probably outside of Rodgers, the number one thing I'm most excited to see. And in years past, with worse Jets teams, and I don't know if you always feel like this. I promise, Michael, we're going to be done soon. It's fun when the Jets are on offense because, I have the ball or trying to score touchdowns, and then they'd be on defense. It's like, all right, when are they going to have the ball again? I don't think I'm going to have any of that this year. It's going to be, okay, we have Aaron Rodgers in the field, or I get to watch this just like 3 waves of just amazing defensive line play from this team and just wreaking havoc on opposing quarterbacks. It's going to be fun no matter what. So with that, Michael, I think we can get out of here. We covered quite a few topics. I remember when I was like, oh, we'll definitely clear an hour. I think we're at an hour and 15, something like that. So there you have it. I think we did win a little off road there with the snap counts, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of other topics we didn't even get to, but got a whole summer for those. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter, Micheal_Nania, myself, Ben W. Blessington. Go to jetsxfactor.com for the best place to go for Jets content. Make sure to check out some of the other Jets X Factor pods. They do some great stuff throughout the week. Subscribe to the Jets X Factor YouTube. If you're able to, please rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. It helps out the podcast a ton. I think that's it, Michael. I don't think you have another Weddle game in you. So with that said,
we can do one. Let's do one.
You want? Oh, God, but if we get a bad one, we didn't get a single I think we got one comment about the Weddle game. So for those 5 listeners that want to hear this Weddle game without being able to see the screen, I'll explain it if they didn't listen. Michael, why don't you pull it up on yours?
All right,
Weddle.
Sure.
Michael introduced me to this. We're trying to do this at the end of the pods because it's really going to help expand our knowledge of random NFL players throughout the entire NFL. But it's basically to play off of Wordle. You get 10 guesses, so you just type in a player. Start off. It could be any player in the NFL. We've been settling on Quincy Williams because he's a nice, has a mid-50s number. But basically, you enter in a player, and then it'll tell you based off of his if he plays offense or defense, what division he is. You kind of have to play off of your guess. It's hard to explain. You did a better job last time.
Height, weight, jersey number.
Not weight, but yeah.
Oh,
Putting Quincy Williams, and I'll talk it through it, Michael. So I'll give each one, all right, and then we can talk through guesses, okay?
All right, start with Quincy Williams.
All right, we're gonna start with Quincy Williams. The podcast is officially over. This is just the Weddle game. All right, so this is a player who is in the AFC, but they're not in the AFC East, and they're an offensive player. They are probably around 6 feet. Seems like because they're
above 5'11", and we get yellow, which means that it's close. So he's probably 6 feet.
Younger than 26, and his number is below 56. So it's an offensive AFC player, not an AFC East. He's around 6 feet, and in his prime.
Running back, a young running back.
What do we think? What are we thinking here? Let's try
Travis Etienne.
All right, bold.
I think he's tall too, right?
All right, let's see it.
So the 6 feet. All right, it's
Not
not Travis Etienne. And
not a running back.
An offensive player.
All right.
It's a special teams player.
Oh, fuck. All right, so special teams player.
Above number 1, though, and it's close. He's number 2 or 3. Probably a kicker.
Probably. So a kicker. Oh, this is right up our wheelhouse.
He's young. He's under 24.
So a young kicker in either the AFC North or AFC West.
McPherson.
Evan McPherson?
Here we go. Oh, no.
AFC North kicker, though.
AFC North kicker.
So it's either a Steelers, Ravens, or Browns kicker.
Cade York? Is he still in the Browns?
I don't know how many kickers I know. Okay, go for it. Try it. Try to think.
York. Here we go. It's Cade York.
Hey, there we go.
Let's go.
Isn't that crazy? In 4 guesses, we went from Quincy Williams to Cade York. Dude, we're going to get him in 2 guesses. We're going to be like, I made that joke last time, but we're going to be like the GeoGuessr guy in the Jet schedule release. All right,
it's hard to be that impressive.
It's hard to beat
We'll leave it off on that. Cade York is in 4 guesses is pretty impressive.
You can go to, what is it, Weddle Unlimited or something? WeddleUnlimited.com.
Yeah.
Something like that. If you want to play, send us your Weddle results. It's always fun. All right. Thank you everybody for listening. Have a great week. We'll be back next Monday. Go Jets.